Good evening. Our prayer this evening is from Vice Mayor Chris Bratcher.
Thank you, Mayor. If you would, I'd like to ask everyone if they would please bow their heads for a moment of silence, please. Amen.
Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome to the Murfreesboro City Council, January 29, 2009. We have a number of guests with us tonight. We're always pleased when we have a lot of folks who come to visit with us, so certainly we want to make you feel welcome, and we appreciate your attendance. And anytime you would like to come and join us, we're always available. And we advertise our meetings so you know when they are, and generally they're every Thursday night. You have before you your consent agenda. If there are any questions about the consent agenda, now's a good time to raise those. If not, I'll accept a motion on the consent agenda, and I believe
We have one item, Mayor.
we have one item, which is a new item, which is a substitute for the agenda item F, and you should have it on your table.
Mayor, I move we approve the consent agenda with the substitute for item F.
All right.
Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, you have the minutes of the meetings held on December 18th, a special meeting, December 18th, a regular meeting, and January the 8th, 2009, a special meeting. If you've had an opportunity to review those minutes, are there any additions or deletions?
No, Mayor, I move we adopt the minutes as submitted.
All right. Thank you.
Second.
Motion and a second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Item 3 is to consider for passage on first reading an ordinance amending Appendix C, Employees Revised Pension Trust Agreement with Murfreesboro City Code to comply with IRS requests. And Ms. McGannon, I understand you have a comment on that.
I do, Mayor Bragg. Thank you. Members of the council, we had come to you with this submittal asking you to make some changes to the plan that we believed perhaps should have been required in 2003. Subsequent to the agenda's preparation, we've had additional discussions with our actuarial firm and their lawyer, and now believe that it will not be necessary for that to be done in order for us to proceed with the next item on the agenda, which is a restatement of the plan its entirety with the 2009 language. So I would ask that 0902 be withdrawn as no longer being deemed necessary, and proceed to my presentation and discussion of Ordinance 0903.
All right. At this time, we will consider for passage on first reading Ordinance 0903, amending Murfreesboro City Code Appendix C, City of Murfreesboro, Tennessee Employees Revised Pension Trust Agreement. Ms. McGannon.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg. You had attached to my cover letter the pension plan as it currently exists, and the proposed restatement of the plan was attached to the ordinance. As outlined in my cover letter, periodically the Internal Revenue Service allows plans to get determination letters indicating that they are and remain qualified, that all the newly required legal language has been added. They now will no longer consider those plans simply with amendments of the new language. They want you to go through a total restatement so they get the complete entity all at one time. That's why the complete plan is being submitted to you rather than just the updated language. As my cover letter pointed out to you, the updated language at considerable length is primarily found in Article 9. That deals with IRS language that really does not apply to any employee or retiree of the city plan because it deals with levels of compensation that no city employee or retiree receives. Nonetheless, we are required to include it. I also pointed out in my cover letter that we have made some changes to reflect what current and, frankly, practice had been for a number of years, which changes will benefit employees, but will not make a difference in the city's financial exposure because we had been paying our life insurance and disability benefits on the basis of the terms of those contracts. And so what we have changed the pension plan document to do is to reflect those changes. We have also tried to make some changes to make the language more inclusive, gender neutral, and to be more specific because employees look to this, retirees look to this, and we want to have it spelled out in a way that is clear. I won't repeat my rather lengthy letter of some of these complex issues. I would be happy to answer any questions about the issues that I addressed in that letter or which you may have noticed in looking at the existing plan and the proposed restated plan. Ms. Mahon has also worked with me, working with our consultants that had been engaged by the city at the pension committee's recommendation to do the restatement. Michael Guyton, the actuary who you've previously met as he's made presentations to the council, is here, as well as with the specialized attorney who's been working on this, John Lucas. They are both here, and Ms. Mahon and I, would be glad to answer any questions. We are coming to you tonight asking to get approval to submit this is our plan to the IRS. We have a deadline based on the cycles during which IRS will accept plans, which means we need to get the plan submitted to make this cycle and not to have to wait for 2 years. We have to get it in the mail now. We are envisioning that the IRS may have issues, or you may have some issues which, upon second or third reading, may call for some modification. But we need, if we're going to meet this window or wait 2 years, to get authority to file this as the plan restatement, and think it would be best to do that with adoption on first reading. I would also emphasize a very important fact that doing it on first reading and waiting on second and third, will not increase any benefit to any existing employee or hurt any existing employee or retiree. It would only take effect when you approve it on third and final reading, and we don't believe that that would occur until the IRS has told us, yes, that document will meet their standards. There are some issues which may be modified a little bit, I said I won't go into great detail, but there's one I do want to point out. It says in the pension plan currently that somebody who is receiving disability benefits does not also get sick or vacation time. It seemed to us that that really was not something that belonged in the pension plan document. That's something that really belongs in the employee handbook. It doesn't have anything to do with retirement benefits. So by withdrawing it as a proposal, we're not changing the fact that those benefits do not accrue when one is getting disability. It isn't making a change just by proposing to withdraw it from the plan. And I think I should stop and see if there are questions about the materials I've covered or some of the other materials and issues that may have occurred to you in your review. And as I say, Mr. Lucas and Mr. Guyton are both here, as is Ms. Mahon.
So the document listed in your letter as Appendix C, which begins on the third page of your letter, is identical to the document that's listed as Appendix C in the Resolution 9003. Is that correct?
No, Mayor, it's not. What is attached to the letter is the existing plan, which will remain in effect until such time as the council would approve, after IRS feedback, the document that is attached to the ordinance. You're being asked to adopt on first reading the document attached to the ordinance and to authorize staff to file that document with the IRS. So I wanted you to have both so that you could compare and contrast the sections that I identified in my cover letter.
Okay, you have not used strikeovers or
No,
markouts or anything like that?
I didn't, that's why I referenced the section numbers. The changing, for example, police officer from policeman, there were too many changes to have too many versions to have it consistently tracked. It went back and forth between the actuarial firm, computers and ours, and that just
So the
didn't seem like it would be
relatively
helpful.
newer looking type that's on the Appendix C attached to the letter is the existing plan.
Yes, sir.
And what is attached to the resolution or the ordinance itself is what you're proposing to send if we pass on 3 readings.
Yes, sir.
All right.
But we'd propose to send it if you authorize us to do so tonight, even after first reading, but it wouldn't take effect until there'd been study, and we'll take it back to the pension committee and probably come to you with some employee handbook provision changes to implement some of the things we talked about. So it would, all you would be doing by passing it on first reading is authorizing us to file it with the IRS.
In total, or in the majority of this, then, is to reflect current practice rather than the existing language. Is that
Well,
not quite a summing up or an executive summary, but
I tried to summarize I guess I would call, there's some of it's current practice, some of it is because it didn't really belong in the pension plan, it really belonged in the employee handbook. One of the things that we think, for example, if you look at the bottom of the second page of my letter, the current plan says if you are receiving disability benefits, you do not, that doesn't count as time worked towards retirement. So somebody who's receiving any form of disability benefits doesn't have that count as days of work towards retirement credit. And of course, retirement is based on the number of days worked. We think that there should be a provision that would allow the City Council to designate what counts as days worked that's outside the plan document. For example, we believe the 90-day qualification period that somebody is waiting to find out if they qualify for long-term disability benefits should count as time worked. We'll be coming back to you to sort of do that. So that is a change in the plan in the sense of we're enabling such a change to be made by deleting the provision that if you get disability benefits, you don't have time work. So we're opening the possibility for a change, but the change won't take effect unless you adopt it in the employee handbook. But that is a deletion we're proposing to make from the plan.
other questions?
So basically, we're updating current practices and then memorializing it in a format as required by the IRS.
That was the goal, yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
It's attorney talk.
I wish Ms. McGannon had learned that.
Zing.
Maybe just let them talk to each other.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. We have to go through this. Any other questions or qualifiers?
You're trying to meet this 2-year, this deadline, so you want to wait 2 more years. What would happen if we didn't meet it, or for some reason, I'm just...
We believe we would still be a qualified plan. It would mean that we would have to we would have to pay our consultant more money and redo everything that we've done now. We might not get the benefit of it.
That was brief.
Got Mr. Edwards' attention. Any other questions on this ordinance at first reading, amending the City Code Appendix C, Murfreesboro Employees Revised Pension Trust Agreement?
Mayor, I move for passage on first reading.
Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gillen.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. This time we've considered for passage on third and final reading an ordinance to zone an area along East Main Street to multifamily residential 16, RM16 district, simultaneous with annexation. Vice Mayor?
Mayor Bragg, if you would, we've gotten a lot of information over the past few weeks concerning this particular rezoning request. I know we have a traffic study, and I think Mr. Adlot has also put in the recap of the neighborhood meeting with several other issues, not only concerning traffic, but concerning several other issues. And I don't know if Mr. Adlot, if he wants to address any of that, do you feel need, or if you would, Mr. Adlot, if you'd like to get up and give us a recap. And then if having council's approval, I would ask, since this is not a public hearing, Mayor, that if the council would suspend the rules to allow Mr. P., who is the county commissioner who represents the residents in that area who are not in the city of Murfreesboro but are in the county, but allow him to speak on their behalf for just as a representative for just a moment, if the council would indulge that.
Did he already speak at the public hearing?
I can't recall if he spoke at the public hearing or not, Mayor, but I would assume he did.
And I think Commissioner Daniel, who is also here,
That was,
did also.
we've had some other studies that was done after they spoke at the first public hearing is the reason why. These new findings and these new studies were done after the public hearing.
Mr. Adlot, where did you go? There you are. Is there some additional information that's been included for us that was not current as of the public hearing?
Mayor, we had our neighborhood meeting after the public hearing, and that was a big issue. Just sort of recap, the council conducted this public hearing back on August the 21st. This came back to the city council in early December, and the council considered it, but asked the staff to have a neighborhood meeting. We had a neighborhood meeting on December the 16th. It was at Hobgood. We had about 22 people. And I'll add that about 6, 7, or 8 of them were staff or members of the applicant's team that was working on the project. There was a variety of discussion. The discussion ranged from traffic, drainage, the matter in which it would impact the area to the north, connection to the John Bragg Highway, access orientation, management of the apartments, how they would be managed by the owners, neighborhood criminal activity, that was a big concern expressed and discussed, and the appearance of the project, how it would appear to the street. In particular, there was a lot of discussion about the traffic study. The traffic study had been prepared by SEC, and there was concern that perhaps the days that the data was collected, the MTSU was not in session, or that the county schools were not in session, which could have it caused a flawed result. After the meeting, during the meeting, I was requested by the people in attendance to communicate this to the council. After the meeting, I did consult with the SEC, the site engineering consultants who worked on the project. Mr. Adam Ledzinger, in particular, he was at the neighborhood meeting. He prepared the traffic study and has been working with the applicant on this. He confirmed that the dates and times of the traffic study were actually during times when MTSU was in session and Rutherford County Schools were in session, that there was not anything out of the ordinary in that regard, that the time of day was during peak hours. I did confirm that with our traffic engineer, Mr. Bonchandran. He actually has confirmed or has indicated that he concurs with the study, the conclusions of it. So that's really a recap since the public hearing, which in all fairness to everybody, that was back in August. The council has passed this on 2 readings to date, and we've had sort of a series of, false starts with the neighborhood thinking we were going to meet the last time the council met, and that was in room 218, which was really not a good time to be discussing that, or for them to attend to participate or listen. So you all had deferred that third and final reading until tonight. I will add this. I did spend quite a bit of time after the meeting looking at the drainage situation. When people provide testimony at a meeting that they're concerned about the drainage and they're already experiencing drainage difficulties or problems, anomalies, or circumstances that are a little unusual or different than what I had previously believed, I listened to them. I use our GIS system. I did investigate, and I was a little surprised by what I found, but actually it validated what I had been hearing and what I believed. What I'd been hearing was that the Holly Park Apartments drains across Main Street and to the north and along Juliet. But I was seeing on the maps that this property drains to the south towards a system that eventually goes into Double Springs. Well, we're both right. As it turns out, there's a little bit of a saddle, a landform, where the center of the intersection is about the high spot, where the west side drains north and the east side drains south. So actually what I found out was that Mrs. Jones's property, the property on the northeast corner, drains south and towards this property. And the property where the Holly Park Apartments, the front of it drains to the north along Juliet. And that's what I'd been hearing, and it confused me, so I looked closer and to determine what the circumstances really were. And that's what I can report. Irregardless of what the circumstances are, I want the people who have discussed this with me to understand that that's something that our city engineer is going to be very concerned with. Our city's planning commission will be looking at any kind of site plan. And our new stormwater regulations are going to require basically that they have no net impact upon adjacent properties. The new stream bank protection requirements requires on-site detention, and this property will have to have on-site detention. So that is something that we're going to look at very closely, and it is my belief that the development of this property will not impact the drainage on the north side, because this property naturally drains to the south towards the ponds that exist along the back of this property. I believe that's a fair recap of the situation. If there are any specific questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Mr. McFarland?
Mr. Aylock, my question on the traffic study, we've got under projected site turning movement, we've got time period morning 7 to 9, 33 left turn, or 33 turns out of the complex is what it's saying. So that's 33 traffics from 7 to 9. But then further down, a little further down the report, it has that the total projected peak hourly traffic generated by this site in the morning is 33 between 7 and 8.
Let me kind of answer that, and I'm looking at this, and I'm wondering if this is the last version. The last version, they had the same conclusions, but Mr. Von Chandran was very careful to help me to understand, and also Mr. Ledzing, he might want to address that the peak hour is contained within that window. That's a 2-hour period that you see, 7 to 9. But the peak hour is the highest traffic, the hour of highest traffic contained within that 2-hour window. So that's really not a 2-hour traffic count. That's really a 1-hour traffic count during the period of the highest traffic contained in that window.
So it means it
could be more movement.
It's a 1-hour volume in a 2-hour period.
Right. That is correct.
So there'll be more than 33 in that 2-hour period.
Yes, that's right. But during the hour of the highest peak, or the highest amount in that 2-hour period, that's what you'd see.
That's confusing.
And forgive me, if you need much more explanation beyond that, Mr. Ledsinger may have to answer for you.
So we've got 64 units, and at the highest hour, we would have 33. But realistically, we're going to have more traffics in a 2-hour period than 33. I mean, that's just the highest it could be in 1 hour.
Well, I won't say that's the highest it could be. That's what is projected, and using their statistical methods for these type of studies. And, you know, people don't operate exactly the same as studies always indicate, but they can give you a very good indication of what the impact would be. And so I would never say that's the highest it could be. I would tell you that's what it would be projected to be on a normal basis.
Would it be reasonable to think that this is in such close proximity to the university that in most apartment complexes that are close to the university, you're going to have 2 cars per unit, maybe 3 cars per unit?
I would say that any unit that has 2 bedrooms, you can expect to have 2 cars per unit. That's just realistic, no matter what part of town we're in, particularly if you see 2 people residing in that. The modern family has 2 cars per adult, or rather a car per adult, which would be 2 cars generally for your household. But being in proximity to the university students don't live a typical life. Their life is tied around their, of course, their life with the university, which would be classes. So they may make several trips per day, but they may not even be anywhere near the peak hour. Often, students may not have classes till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. They may have classes more in the afternoon. They may make several trips back and forth. But one thing I've discovered about university students, they don't usually come out early in the morning if they can help it.
I've had 3 of them, and I can confirm that.
Nonetheless, Mr. Taylor, based on what this study shows, though, realistically, we can have, once the place is fully rented out, 120 cars, and they're saying that during the peak hour in the morning that only 25% of those are going to be leaving the places. Is that how this boils down?
That is what our traffic study has indicated, and that's what our traffic engineer has offered his concurrence for. And I asked about that when you've got the modern household, but a lot of the information for these type of studies comes from what they call the ITE, International Traffic Engineers, and they do studies to collect data on these sort of things. Nobody sit there and watch what in Murfreesboro to do a particular study on the behavior of college students to the point that they can use that for this type of traffic study. These ITE studies, though, they do a pretty good job nationwide and can offer a good prediction of what the circumstances will be.
There are a couple of other apartment complexes in the area that are geared toward recruiting college students to be residents. We know what their traffic counts are in the peak hours?
I don't know that I could say we do. I don't think we've done a particular study for any of those campuses or those complexes.
And I think, if I remember, several years ago, we dealt with a development that was on old Las Casas Highway. I can't remember who the developer was. I think it was Mr. Agarwal, that we were real sensitive on the parking issue, because I remember we had the conversation that most college students, whether you have 2 rooms, you're real sensitive to how many other guests that they may have at any time. And we looked at that on parking. We also looked at that on trips, that even though it was not in the traffic study, we had to take that into account using common sense, that you're going to have more people who are in those units making trips, even though they may not live there.
As part of our, and looking at nationwide studies and looking at the type of apartment complexes, we did increase our parking requirements. In fact, for more than 1 bedroom, it's based upon the number of bedrooms rather than the number of units.
Right. And Mr. Adlot, following along what Mr. McFarland was saying, if I recall correctly, the apartment complex he's referring to was actually more realistically within walking distance of the university, whereas this one that we're looking at tonight, students living there are going to have to drive to get on campus.
I would suspect that would be the case here.
So trips, the more likelihood of more trips than that than the one he's referring to. Car trips in the morning. Matter of fact, Mr. Agarwal's building may have actually been closer to some of the buildings and some of the parking lots that are considered part of the campus. So.
Mr. Adlot, what was the recommendation from the Planning Commission on this?
The Planning Commission recommended approval of this rezoning.
Was it a unanimous vote, or was it split, or
It's
how
my
was it?
recollection that it was unanimous in favor. I think all members were present also, but I wouldn't. I'd have to check my records to confirm that.
Thank
Mayor, I mentioned earlier, but I would, if it was through state law, I would make a motion that we suspend the rules and let Commissioner Pease speak.
I would let that apply to Mr. Daniel as well.
Absolutely.
I think we out of respect.
I didn't know if he was here or not. I didn't see Mr. Daniel. I see Mr. Daniel. I wouldn't have a problem with that either.
I would second that motion. I think we owe that respect to our fellow elected officials.
Right. I don't have a problem with that.
Any questions on the motion? Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Gentlemen, if either one of you or both would like to come to the microphone, you're welcome to.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for allowing us to speak tonight. And don't get worried about all these papers I've got. This is your agenda. I've just got a few things to summarize. Joseph actually did a good job of covering some of the things, and it's very evident from the questions that were asked that the councilmen have done a good job of looking at this, and I sincerely appreciate that. A lot of times we feel like in the county when there's something that's adjacent to the municipalities, our folks don't have a representative that they vote for that actually votes on these issues. And I think you all remember back in 1776, we had the same kind of issues going on. I think they call it taxation without representation. This is a little bit different. It's regulation or zoning without representation. But again, I want to compliment all of you. I think y'all have done a good job of looking at these issues, regardless of how this goes. But just for a quick summary, I'll have to agree with Mr. Adelot on most of the things that he said, although I do have some questions. And I wanted to summarize some of my constituents over there have contacted me and just wanted to make sure some of the things they had brought up in the past you understood clearly. One thing that keeps coming up is the traffic study, and it was mentioned that Rutherford County schools were open, and we had a misunderstanding there. We thought that MTSU was closed on one of the days the studies were done. But what we had told them was the city's year-round school was closed during that time period, which Hopgood School is affected by that, and there is bus traffic and personal passenger traffic in this area during those times, and probably would have been a little bit lighter there. But just kind of recap what we asked for. First, we asked that there be no entrance whatsoever on Woodbury Highway just to cut down traffic there. And barring that, we had asked for turn lanes. And, of course, that's where your traffic study comes in and, whether there's a need for a turn lane or not. But, just to kind of make this short, we want to respectfully request that you still have no entrance on East Main Street. And barring that, that you do put in a turning lane. One thing that when you do look at this in planning and their plot plan, I don't know about your long-range plan on East Main Street, but I would ask you to look at the setbacks that you're going to require if you widen that road and go ahead and put those in effect on this plot plan. So that'll save your citizens, both county and city citizens, money on that. Of course, one of the things mentioned were crime. Murfreesboro City does not patrol the McFarland subdivision. I've had two different constituents tell me specifics where, one, they had some of their neighbors from across the street, some apartment complexes, walk over and casually go through their truck trying to get into their toolbox, and they ran them off. And then just a few days ago, one of the guys was strolling through the neighborhood over there, stopped and asked him for a joint. So the people in this neighborhood are elderly for the most part, not all of them, but that kind of stuff scares them. There has been a murder in the last year over in that area, and I think two. And so I think those are legitimate concerns. One of the biggest issues, and this is next to last, is drainage. And I think Joseph did a good job there. I've been on Rutherford County's Planning Commission for a period of years. I'm not currently on there, but one of the biggest problems that we've got is drainage throughout this county. And of course, federal government is requiring us to do drainage, wastewater runoff studies, and it's going to cost us, it's costing us a lot of money right now, both you and I. But one thing I wanted to point out is your regulations and our regulations both allow us to go into blue line streams, and that's a problem because we don't look at what's happening downstream when that happens. Those of you that have been around here about 20 years probably remember every time it used to rain up in Metro, we'd have Channel 5 and all those guys out there taking pictures of Mill Creek where it flooded. Well, have you noticed that doesn't happen anymore? What they did, they went in and they did studies of their drainage basins. The county's actually done one study like that, but that's something we need to work together either as county and municipalities to get these drainage studies in place, and they use software, and you may have that in place now, but basically, once they did their studies, they could take the software. If they put in a 1,200 square foot house, they could plug that into the zone, and it would tell exactly what would happen not only in the adjacent area but downstream. And that's something that the county desperately needs to do, and I assume y'all will need those same type tools. But we would respectfully also request that you do a drainage study. Now, Joseph pointed out that the water is going back and forth across Woodbury Highway. I don't know how many of you are real familiar with that area, but McFarland has a lot of water standing in there now. We have sewer systems, septic systems that are failing due to water standing. So these guys are really sensitive about any water coming on them more than they've got. And Joseph's correct. It's the same thing that I've heard. The long-term residents, when Holly Park went in, there was an increase in water. And they also say there was an increase in water when the Tennessee apartments over on John Cragg went in. Now, you ask how this happened, and I know Joseph has looked at his GIS maps, but up around Twin Oak Drive where it crosses East Main or Woodbury Highway out that far, close to Horseman Supply, there, if I'm not mistaken, there is a duct that goes under the road. I don't know if it's concrete culvert, pipes, or whatever, but that allows some of this water that he was talking about that drains up toward the Double Springs area to come back across the road, which goes back toward McFarland, drains back that way. What doesn't go there and goes on down to Double Springs is even more of a problem for me. That Double Springs water goes through karst systems. We've talked about it at some of the planning commission meetings. Actually comes out and is expelled through some of the sinkholes along there. And guess what it does? It crosses Twin Oak and heads back in this direction. Not only right there, but it goes on down and gets in the area of, what is that area? You've got a subdivision in the city right across Halls Hill Pike where Twin Oak Woods Edge. But all this drains in that area, so you're basically dumping more water back on yourselves that you're going to have to handle in the long run, and that's why I would respectfully request that you do a downstream water study on this, because I think that there's more water coming off these areas and then coming back around than what's actually realized. But the main thing I wanted to tell you guys is how much we appreciate you allowing us to talk, basically because we don't have a vote on this issue. And I also want to thank my colleague, Commissioner Daniel, for being here and supporting too. This kind of reminds me, first time I ran for election, we met here and sat there, and I remember how nervous I am. And sometimes when you get out of your comfort zone, you get a little nervous. But I appreciate y'all letting us talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
When I came up before, I wanted to make the point that I, too, am very pleased with the opportunity to present and the courtesy with which I've been treated by all of the city employees. Mr. A-Lot and everybody has been most hospitable. I have a policy as a rookie commissioner that I don't talk long. And the thing I wanted to say here tonight is that I'm here in support of the ideas advanced by Mr. P. and by the citizens out in the area. But when it's been said for me, I don't say it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Adelot?
Mayor, I do
Vice
have,
Mayor.
if I could get Mr. Adelot to, one more time, Mr. Adelot, if you could come up and maybe address some of the issues and points that Commissioner P. had brought up, for us, if you feel like there is a need or would be a reason for a drainage study and turning lanes and the setbacks, if in due, as we're aware that East Main is a substandard road, and if we decide to widen it one day, would it be, will we be able to do that if we let this complex go forward?
Well, roads, let's talk about road first. East Main Street is a substandard road. Come what may, the developer has an obligation towards its improvement. At the very least, he can anticipate that he is obligated to construct sidewalks, curbs and gutters along the frontage. Now, this is one of those situations where, because building a short segment may be less desirable than waiting for another time, with the city engineer's decision and with the planning commission's concurrence, we would determine whether to allow for a payment in lieu of construction or to have the developer build it. We just have to see the engineering on it before we would make that decision. Now, with regards to left turn lanes, although the traffic study indicates that one is not required, that's still something that the planning commission would discuss during site plan review. Typical. If this property were already zoned and not before you as a public hearing item or a decision to make the zoning, regardless of what type of development, that would still be something that the planning commission could determine. As they review it, they would have to make a decision about what the impact the traffic generated from this property would have on the street. Right now, we have a traffic study provided by the developers, engineers, based upon certain assumptions, based upon review of our traffic engineer, that shows that TDOT, using TDOT standards, TDOT on a state highway would not have required a turn lane. That's really all the traffic study indicates. It doesn't indicate whether or not the planning commission, the city's planning commission, will determine the need for one.
And I guess that would be subject to, when you say the study would be subject to the findings of, or the opinions of that engineer, is that correct?
It would be something that the engineer's preparation would be considered, yes, but still the planning commission's judgment would be considered.
Right.
The planning commission has not made a decision on that issue because it has not yet reviewed a site plan with that before it to consider. And when it is, we will roll up our sleeves and give a very scathing review, as we do all of these type of site plans. And that will be something that I will imagine the two members of our planning commission who serve on the council will challenge the staff on to get to the bottom of them. So that's something we would return to. And as I say, the study provided by the developer's engineer indicates using TDOT's decision-making process, TDOT would not have required a turn lane. That's not to say Murfreesboro can't. With regards to the time of year, I don't think that the Hobgood situation would have materially changed it, and I'm not certain if they were open or not. But the city schools, generally, they're more contained inside the city, and this is big on the very edge. I don't think that it really would have had a statistical impact on the traffic study.
Touch on the drainage.
With regards to a drainage study, there is some, whenever water drains into a sinkhole, there's always some amount of mystery about it, and we usually try to assume the worst. And the double spring system, we know there's some problems with it, and the county has really wrestled with that problem in the past. With a subdivision that was very much impacted by water rising from a sinkhole and flooding houses, and it's something that we with the city had the I guess the good fortune of being able to watch it on TV and being somebody else's problem, but it really was a community-wide problem when that happens. While the city weren't having to deal with it directly, it was something that's happened in our community that we felt anxiety about. But we weren't responsible. We weren't a direct player in that game. But we were learning from the situation by observing it. We know about the double spring system. It's my belief, though, that this development would not have a very much of an impact because of our stormwater requirements for the on-site, basically a 48-hour detention for what we call stream bank protection. And I will forgive Mr. P for not being very much aware of that because that's something that is very new to us. As of October 1, We're just now beginning to implement it. And what it is designed to mitigate downstream impacts of water velocities. But that's something we'll be learning more about, and I'm certain he and his Planning Commission will be also. But as far as the drainage study, if the city and the county can get together on the double spring system, it would be a good idea to do a study. Now, something like that could be involved. It might be possible that we could enlist the Corps of Engineers or the USGS to help us do some sort of a stream monitoring, rainfall monitoring to correlate it with water in the sinkholes. Maybe even some underground injection to determine what kind of, or rather dye tracing to determine where that water goes. We believe, there may have already been some dye tracing on it, but a study would be very welcome, but I don't know that it is necessary to make a decision on this matter of zoning tonight. But yes, we would encourage that. Were there any other issues?
I think you covered them all. I guess one question I'd ask, I guess, would be maybe to Ms. McGannon. This being a rezoning request in lieu of a planned development, does this council have the authority to dictate turning lanes or any kind of off-site road improvements or anything just on those zoning requests, or does it need to be a planned development?
No, sir. With the kind of zoning that it is, the authority to determine whether a turn lane would be required would be something the Planning Commission would do at site plan. And it's not appropriate to add it as a condition for zoning because it is not a planned development.
But that is something that can be required by those of us on the Planning Commission when we look at it at site plan is what
Right.
we're saying right now.
Yes, the determination would need to be factual, some reasonable nexus. But yes, that authority would remain with the Planning Commission.
Any other questions?
Mayor, I think that we've heard a lot of good testimony tonight. We've had 2 public hearings. We've had a neighborhood meeting. I'm not sure that we can ever work out all the details for everybody in this particular case. One of the things that we really didn't mention tonight is half of this property is already zoned for an apartment zone, which is not the correct terminology, but it's already RM16 zoning. So I don't think that's been put into the equation tonight, but it is an important factor, at least in my looking at this originally. It's brought up that the Planning Commission has the authority and the responsibility to review this at site plan. I think that will be another opportunity for the engineers to help us determine if turning lanes are needed, how the setbacks work, the entrances. Those things are what the Planning Commission does, and I think that that's a safeguard for this council to do with that. So with that, I'll move for approval on third reading.
Second.
All right, you have a motion and second to approve on third and final reading.
Mayor, I will just make a comment, if I could, that if this is approved, I would hope that the Planning Commission would listen to the concerns and comments. But as far as this traffic study, I mean, all due respect to the traffic engineer that performed this, and even the city's traffic, I don't put much, I don't give it much credence on this traffic study. I think it's way low. I think it's a lot worse than what this study impact shows. And I'm not an engineer, but I don't put much confidence in that study.
You're not?
And I'm not either, but I would love to see turn lanes for you Planning Commission folks, Doug and Toby, on the planning commission, and some kind of form of handling that traffic from Rutherford down to this particular point in particular. And I'm not a traffic engineer, and when you talk about TDOT, there are some traffic signals that don't go up that we think ought to go up during the expansion of roads. So, but we have the authority to look out for our citizens and whatever's, and if this is approved, then I really would like to see something done to, because we know that, an attachment to John Bragg, that wasn't realistic from day one. We wanted one from Walmart and couldn't get it. Remember that? And so that wasn't going to happen. So we need to move on.
Well, not only the turning lanes that enter this particular piece of property, but also the off-site impact at the intersection of East Main and Rutherford Boulevard needs to be looked at as well. So,
That's right.
or stacking about capacity and things like that.
That's right.
I agree with both of you gentlemen. Regardless of what this traffic count study says, I think that the merit was going to be there when we look at this site plan for a turn lane.
And I think that's where I'm, the owner of the property, it's already zoned RM16, and I understand that we're bringing additional property in, and, the property we're bringing in is contiguous to RM16 on 2 or 3 sides. But I think what my concern has been from the start is we talk about that East Main's a substandard road. We've got drainage issues, which I feel safe that our staff will take care of those, that they're looked at so diligently throughout the process. But I still feel, looking at the traffic study, looking at everything that we've looked at, knowing the area that we have, I still feel like this plan would have been better served as a planned development coming through, where all of these issues that we're talking about could have been handled at the council level. I have complete faith in the Planning Commission, but once it leaves this body, like I said, I have faith in our council representatives who are on the Planning Commission, but once it leaves the council, it's out of our hands from there. So I still think in areas, and I know Mr. Adelot said that he had tried to push to do a planned development, or had talked about doing that, and when you have property that has this many issues and these many questions, that it seems that a planned development could have answered some of those on the front end, and we would have known those going forward. So
I agree. Just to reiterate on that, I would probably feel more comfortable with this project if this council and this body could have put some stipulations and regulations and things that we're concerned about on top of this. I do have faith in our Planning Commission and our members on there, but I think that's our job to do that, and I can't support it without that kind of level of comfort in my mind. There's like the drainage and the traffic and all those different things that we have to have control over, and we don't in this particular instance.
And the one thing I would say is that we've been, what I feel like from my time up here, that we've been consistent by saying that we have shied away from straight zoning
or blanket zoning
in certain instances because of the uncertainty that we've dealt with. I don't think that we really deal with a lot of straight zonings anymore, whether it be straight RS or straight RM. The majority of stuff is either the planned development approach, because it protects the citizens and it protects the city because we know what's going there. So, but at the same time, measuring between the property owner and working together. But that's why we have such good staff, because they do that.
Any other questions or comments? Right.
Call the question.
You want us to call the question?
I think y'all are ready. Why don't you call the roll?
Vice Mayor Bratcher,
No.
Mr. Edwards,
Aye.
Mr. Gilly,
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
No.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Young,
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. And certainly, we appreciate the two commissioners being here as well as the neighborhood residents. And I look forward to working with the commission. Hopefully, the county commission will bring us a proposal to fund some additional road work on Woodbury Highway. They also would bring us a proposal to fund some drainage studies in that particular area. And certainly, we appreciate the cooperation that we have both with our police department and with the sheriff's department in that area. But if you have things and improvements out there in that area, as Commissioner, you've got 10% of the commission here tonight. We hope you'll bring those proposals to us and how we can help you fund those proposals so you can serve your constituents as well as you have tonight. Thank you for being here. All right, at this time, we'll consider for passage on second reading an ordinance amending Chapter 2, Administration, Section 2-166 through 2-174, dealing with Cable TV Commission.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Pursuant to a resolution adopted by City Council on December 18, 2008, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider a zoning request for 2.41 acres located along North Thompson Lane from LI, BPD, and GDO-2 to PCD, BPD, and GDO-2 district. Notice of said public hearing was published in the January 11, 2009 issue of the local newspaper. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Bragg, members of the council. This evening you have before you your public hearing on a planned development for property located on the yellow in the map, which is just along the eastern side of Thompson Lane, north of the intersection of Medical Center Parkway. This proposal is for a 102-room, 55-foot tall, 4-story extended stay hotel. The applicants are surrounded by the hospital campus to the east, LI zoning to the west, and PUD zoning to the south, which is the development that Mr. Swanson, Joe Swanson Jr. is developing. The applicants, we recently have had site plans approved also here at the corner for a Walgreens and also an office retail building and another retail building. So this is within that entire area that's becoming almost like a second campus to support our hospital. The applicants are requesting to zone the property from light industrial, which also lies in the BP and the GDO2 zone district, to PCD. And the reason for that is because of the height increase. There are no other variances being requested at this time. However, in the past, whenever there's been height issues, because the BP district only allows 35 feet tall, as well as the GDO, the Planning Commission has taken the stance from our zoning ordinance in Section 24, which recommends that variances not be issued for that, but instead a planned development approach be followed. Concerning the architecture tonight, the applicants are proposing a predominantly brick building with EFS. I think the percentages probably come out to about 60-40, with an L-shaped design with a building front that has been designed specifically to address Thompson Lane. The applicants originally, when they came and met with staff, showed a building that was completely with the side facing Thompson Lane. And based on previous discussions that the council has had and the Planning Commission about the design, they have come back and done more of an L-shaped design to have an entrance with the drive-through, et cetera, drop-off canopy at the front so that it has a front facing towards Thompson Lane. The building essentially has been designed with four-sided architecture because of its proximity to the other buildings in the area and its importance to that relationship of the neighborhood. The applicants have shown on the renderings a very yellow color to the EFS, and staff has worked with them because we wanted to try to find colors that would be more fitting in with what the hospital is doing. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get the brick samples prepared for you tonight, but they're going to be changing the EFS colors to more of a taupe, more of a warm color. It may even have some gray undertones, and they've sent their bricks back, which are originally shown as red brick, to their brick supplier to try to find a brick that has some of that color flex inside of it to make it more cohesive. It'll also tie in better with what the design of the hospital. The applicants are showing about 43% open space on this site, 20% is required in the GDO district. They're showing nice landscape area, a gazebo area, grills, et cetera, and also a connection to the greenway in that area, which we hope will be utilized in the future. I think it'll be a really nice addition for that hospital area. You have your program books in front of you tonight, which explain the proposed plan development, as well as Mr. Kevin Gunther, who's representing the applicant, is here tonight as well to provide you any more additional information that you would like and to answer any questions. And I will also be available to answer questions after you conduct your public hearing. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for Ms. Logan? All right, if there are no questions, we'll open the public hearing at this time. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this request, please step to the microphone, give us your name and address. Is anyone here wishing to speak for or against this zoning request? If not, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we will consider for passage on first reading an ordinance to zone an area along North Thompson Lane to a PCD, BPD, and GDO2 district. Yes.
Let me ask Ms. Logan one question.
Mr. Edwards.
Are the renderings on page 8 and 9 exact, or are they concept?
They're concept. They will be developed further as we go into the architectural review. They haven't been for site plan review, and that will occur later. But we want to make sure that we really have a nice front entrance point. It's kind of hard to tell on these color renderings, but I think once they develop the architectural plans, that will speak more. That element will really shine more. And, of course, the next set of plans will also hopefully reflect the color changes because we really feel that is going to be an enhancement to that building.
Okay. Do the developers understand what the GDO is about?
Yes, sir. They have met with staff on this numerous times, and they also met with Mr. Lyons and Mr. Haley, and I think that they definitely understand our position.
Okay.
I hope they do. They're shaking their heads, they do.
Good.
And we will, of course, expect to have complete plans for development at the final design review. But we are pretty happy with the design of the building, especially from where it is now and where it started. And the colors, I think, once the colors are changed, they'll help a lot as well. Originally, I think that the colors had struggled a little bit, but some of the other colors that they use throughout the Candlewood product is more of like a salmon color, and we just didn't think that would really work with that area for our hospital. So they've been willing to modify their colors to try to, work with what the city feels is more appropriate.
But roof line and placement of brick are fairly established?
Yes, sir. If anything, there would be more and nothing less than what you see in your books tonight.
Okay.
Mayor, one of the points that I thought was unique about this site was that the back end, the back of the building, which could be viewed from the hospital or the medical office buildings, has really been put together very well with the formal open space, and that the greenway will come up to this, and there will be a walkway from the greenway to the back of this. So you will have access, the residents or tenants or renters or guests, that's a better term, would have access to the greenway.
They'll be able to walk all the way to the Dodge store.
And with that, I'll be quiet.
Great pizza roll.
I know because I've done it.
This is a nice compliment, I think, to the medical and hospital campus that we've seen going on in that area of the gateway. And I would move for approval on first reading.
Second.
All right, you have a motion, second. Any questions on the motion? Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, pursuant
Thank
to
you.
Chapter 1101 of 1998, enacted by the Tennessee General Assembly, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider annexation progress reports for plan of services effective for at least 1 year along Florence Road, Kimbrough Road, Compton Road, Manchester Highway, north of County Farm Road, and Sulphur Springs Road in these and those effective for at least 6 months along Armstrong Valley Road, New Salem Road, Shelbyville Highway, Armstrong Valley Road, and Moreland Lane, Armstrong Valley Road, Franklin Road, Highway 96, and you have a copy attached. Welcome, Ms. Ely.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Bragg and Councilman. I'm pleased to present to you progress reports. As you are well aware, Public Chapter 1101 of 1998, enacted by the General Assembly, requires that 6 months after the effective date of an annexation and annually thereafter until all services have been extended according to the plan of services adopted for that annexation ordinance, a municipality must publish in a newspaper of general circulation a progress report for the extension of services as established in the plan of services. The law further requires that the legislative body of the municipality hold a public hearing on such progress reports after proper publication of the notice in the newspaper. On January 8th of this year, you, City Council, has scheduled a public hearing for progress reports for 11 areas. The areas which have been which we've had the 6-month progress report public hearing for, but now are doing the 1 year, a year after that 6-month progress report public hearing, are as follows: approximately 26.19 acres located west of Florence Road, which became effective June 17, 2006. Approximately 22.2 acres north of Kimbrough Road, which became effective on June 17, 2006 as well. Approximately 79.5 acres north of Compton Road, with an effective date of September 2, 2006. Approximately 27 acres west of Manchester Highway, with an effective date of August 12, 2006. Approximately 4 acres located along the north side of County Farm Road, which became effective September 2, 2006. Approximately 45 acres along the eastern side of Sulphur Springs Road, with an effective date of November 18, 2006. And I also have some 6 areas which you should hold a public hearing for, which have been effective for at least 6 months and have not had a public hearing thus far. Those areas are as follows: approximately 8.25 acres located on the west side of Armstrong Valley Road, with an effective date of October 13, 2007. Approximately 26.88 acres along New Salem Road, which we also call Highway 99, and St. James Street. Effective date was October 13, 2007. Approximately 28 acres east of Shelbyville Highway, which is also called Highway 231, with an effective date of March 29, 2008. And approximately 54.34 acres located on the eastern side of Armstrong Valley Road, and became effective on May 31, 2008. And lastly, approximately 51.6 acres along Moreland Lane, Armstrong Valley Road, and Franklin Road, which we also know as Highway 96, with an effective date of June 14, 2008. Copies of the progress reports for these annexation ordinances have been included in your agenda materials. To date, services have been extended to all 11 areas according to what was outlined in the plan of services. I did place a legal notice in the Murfreesboro Post for January 11, 2009, which advertised the public hearing for tonight. So my recommendation to you would be to hold a public hearing on the progress reports of these annexed areas, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Any questions for Ms. Ely before we open the public hearing? If not, at this time I'll open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against or make comments regarding these annexation progress reports for plan of services as mentioned for a year or 6 months, please step forward. Give us your name and address. Is anyone here wishing to speak? All right, I'll close the public hearing at this time, and I'll ask for a motion to accept these annexation progress reports.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland. Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ely. At this time, we'll hear from, I believe, Ms. Ronnie Shaw with regards to Read to Succeed. Ms. Shaw, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Thank you so much for the time. I am Ronnie Shaw, the Executive Director of Read to Succeed. As most of you know, we are the literacy initiative here for Rutherford County. We create large public events to celebrate the written word, like Reading the Schools Day, Reading Rally, and Unplug and Read. We have some age-specific programs like our 6th grade Read to Be Spelling Championship, our high school arts conference, and of course our adult literacy program that provides tutors to adult learners. We also have family literacy programs like the Families That Read Succeed and the Imagination Station program. I want to take just a minute to thank you all for your support of Read to Succeed, both financially and with your time. The fact that you all understand how much literacy truly matters for the health and the well-being and the economic stability of our community means a lot to us, that you understand how powerful that is. And just listening to your meeting for the last 45 minutes really brings home how important it is that folks out there in the community are reading and being literate so that they can understand what's going on in their local government. So I'm here tonight to tell you specifically about our one-book selection for this year. It is Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver. You might remember this one-book community read initiative as something we do with our very own Linebaugh Library System and MTSU. We ask folks in the community to read this book. That's all we're looking is for people to maybe at the water cooler, instead of how about them Vols, it might be, hey, have you gotten to Chapter 6 yet? And so now you want to read the book and find out about Chapter 6. In this book, the family, it's actually Barbara Kingsolver's family, a very popular author. They take a year to eat only locally produced food. So our readers in the community will learn a lot in a very painless way. It's a very easy read. It's very entertaining. It's funny. It's smart. It's a great way to save money, too, for folks who might be looking to trim their home budgets a little bit. People can share the title at their civic groups, their church groups, their neighborhood groups, their book groups. I have been to the Smyrna and Laverne City Councils to talk about Animal Vegetable Miracle, and they have also offered to read the book. So I've brought this copy in the hopes that one of you might be interested in being the first to take it and then to pass it to your peers as good models for the rest of the community. Do I have any takers?
You do.
Excellent.
I'll be happy to.
Well,
and I will read it to Mr. Bratcher.
You got a lot of pictures in it.
I know. He's promised me that for years, and he had never done it.
well, that would be great. I would love for you to read it to whoever you like.
Bring popcorn.
Yeah, sure. Popcorn.
Any questions that y'all have about Read to Succeed or our one-book initiative?
Ronnie, just one small anecdote I want to share with you. Last year's book was The Great Santini, and just a couple of weeks ago when the episode happened in New York with the plane having to be landed in the Hudson, I was on the phone with another lawyer speaking to from Nashville who was talking about that it was birds that had gotten in the engine. And I remember, and I said, if you've read The Great Santini, you'll remember that the only thing that scares a great fighter pilot, according to Bull Meacham, are birds.
See, so it shows you how being literate really can feed into your life. I love that. That's great. And I believe, Councilman Gilly, you're the one who took The Great Santini for me last year. Is that correct?
And we watched the movie of it with Robert Duvall at the Center for the Arts.
That's right. Great. Well, there's no movie version of this, but it will make you want to plant a garden, I promise. Oh, sorry about that.
Audio book.
Actually,
it is for Mr. Bratcher, thanks to you.
Actually, your local library does have this as an audio book. I have not listened to it, but I hear that it's really great. And, as the director of the local literacy initiative, I do like to see people actually turning pages, but I think that that's a great option.
They don't have an 8-track, Chris.
No, but they got pictures.
He wanted the coloring book version anyway.
Good Lord.
Well, thank you, Mr. Edwards. I will leave this on the table for you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw, and thank you for all your work across our community at large. And you certainly are very industrious, and you motivate the rest of us to be so also.
Well, that's good. That's my job.
Thank
you.
This time we'll consider recommendations of the Planning Commission to schedule a public hearing to consider rezoning an area along Rushwood Drive and South Church Street from RM16 to OG. Mr. Adelot?
Thank you, Mayor. During its regular meeting on January 7th of 2009, the Murfreesboro Planning Commission considered and recommended approval of the following matter, and that is a rezoning request for approximately 1.32 acres along Rushwood Drive and South Church Street to be rezoned from RM16 to OG. I would point out that this property does not have direct frontage on either one of these streets. It's really in behind the property that fronts on Rushwood, and it's adjacent to an existing office park that's actually zoned CH, and this would be an addition to it. We just need to schedule a public hearing.
Ms. McGannon?
Mayor, I would suggest February 26th.
All right, is there a motion?
Move to set a public hearing February 26th.
Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider recommendations of the Building and Codes Director to schedule a public hearing with regards to temporary flag signs, and also consider for passage on first reading an ordinance amending Chapter 25 and a quarter signs, Section 25 and a quarter -20, 25 and a quarter -23, and 25 and a quarter -25, dealing with temporary flag signs. Mr. Whitaker, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The Planning Department and Code staff are recommending amendments to the sign ordinance dealing with flag signs tonight. Section 1 and 2 of the proposed amendments would exempt owners of single-family and two-family dwellings from having to obtain flagpole permits. We naturally would continue to regulate height, setbacks, requirements from power poles, etc. Section 3 of these amendments would add a new subsection to the temporary sign ordinance, allowing an unlimited number of non-commercial flags for temporary events that have received special use permits from the BZA. This recommendation was presented to the Planning Commission on January the 7th and is scheduled for a public hearing on February the 4th. We ask that the Council consider for passage on first reading tonight and set for a public hearing. I'll try to answer any questions on the amendments.
All right. Any questions? Ms. McGannon?
I believe February 26th would be appropriate for this public hearing as well.
February 26th, then. Is that all right? All right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. You have your public hearing. Would you like to cover the, Ms. McGannon, the temporary flag signs?
I believe Mr. Whitaker can do so. I don't know that he wants to necessarily add more to what he said. It is something that we ask that you go ahead and consider on first reading now so that we can be sure we have it in place because of a community event that is in the planning process, and we don't believe that there would be objection to it. That's why we're asking for consideration on first reading tonight prior to the public hearing.
So moved.
Second. Motion and second. Any questions on the motion? Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. All right. This time we'll consider recommendations of the Water and Sewer Board with regards to auxiliary raw water intake repairs, change order number 1. No change orders.
Thank you, Mayor. Well,
It says right there, no,
Change
no.
order.
It says change order, no.
Well, I'll second that motion.
unfortunately, we are recommending one in that this would increase the contract amount by $33,000. This is a diver that's doing work on our underwater intake on Percy Breach Lake. In doing their investigations and trying to do the repair work, they found that the sidewalls and bottom and wing walls of this structure is beyond repair, and they're recommending that we just cast a new structure and submerge it and attach it. And so this is to allow for the materials that would be required to do that. In the contract already, we have a schedule of their time and effort to do that, so we don't think this will exceed the contract amount, but by adding this amount to it, it does add $33,000 to the contract. We believe it's going to come in, once all is done, about $380,000. But this adds miscellaneous materials to it so we can get this fabricated.
Any questions for Mr. Kirchner on this change order?
So why, and we discussed this at the Water and Sewer Board meeting the other day, while we're adding this amount now, we still believe that overall we're going to come in under the budget.
Under 380,000, I believe it's going to be about, based on what their estimate of their time would be.
That's 25,000 less than what the original bid is.
Yes, sir.
Move for approval.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye.
Thank you.
How long had this structure been there in place? Can you give me a general idea? 15 years, 10 years?
Say 10?
Okay, thank you. This time we'll consider recommendations of the city engineer with regards to appraisals and property acquisition for Veterans Parkway Phase 3B and 3C and additional appraisals for Rucker Lane Veterans Parkway Phase 3A. Welcome, Mr. Griffin.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg, members of the council. Have before you tonight the appraisals and property acquisitions for Veterans Parkway, Phase 3B and 3C, and the additional appraisals for Rucker Lane and / Veterans Parkway 3A. Our consultant, Weiser Company, has determined the amount of right-of-way required for the construction of Phases 3B and 3C of Veterans Parkway. Of course, that's formerly known as the Southwest Loop. In addition, they have determined additional properties that will be required for proposed improvements to Rucker Lane. I've included a map detailing the limits of each of the proposed phases in your agenda package. We've requested and received amendments to Florence and Hutchison's original Rucker Lane proposal dated March 7th of 2008 and approved by council during your meeting on March 14th of 2008. The following provided a table which indicates the number of additional tracks per phase and the cost per track and also the total cost for all the additional tracks that will be appraised. I might add that this, along with previous council approvals, will conclude the appraisals for Veterans Parkway from Church Street all the way back over to Franklin Highway. A copy of the proposal is attached for your review. These amendments will bring the total cost of the appraisals for this portion of the project to $189,500. After we received appraisals for the acquisitions required from the properties, we propose to purchase the required property from the owners as outlined in the following. The owner will be offered a letter, which I've attached a copy of that in your agenda also, indicating the appraised values for their affected property, improvements, and any damages, and will offer an additional 10% or 5% of the total value is greater than $200,000. Included with the letter, we will give the owners a copy of the appraisal for their review. The property owner will be asked for a response in a month. If they can substantiate that there's any factual mistakes with the appraisal, such as errors in area taking, then a revised appraisal based on the appraised value per square foot would be determined. If the offer is not acceptable to the property owner, the legal department would file condemnation with the actual value of the taking being deposited into the court. We recommend approval to proceed with the appraisals and acquisitions in the manner outlined above with funding from the TML loan. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for the city engineer? Is there a motion?
Move for approval.
Second. All right, you have a motion and second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Mr. Young?
Mr. Griffiths, could you give me a 1 minute or less
Update on Rucker Lane.
On Rucker Lane?
Yes, sir. Where are we on that?
We are currently, we've actually broke Rucker Lane into two separate phases. If you'll look on the map I provided, right around the Muirwood Boulevard, there to the south would be phase 1, and then from there to the north would be phase 2. Right now, we're concentrating on the southwest, or on the Veterans Parkway. Excuse me, Rob. Our consultant realized during the design and the traffic control of Rucker Lane that it really couldn't be built without closing at least sections of it. We felt like closing the sections without the Veterans Parkway being present would be too much of a detriment to the traffic in the area, and so we decided instead to put our forces onto the Veterans Parkway, have that complete at least 2 lanes the entire route, and then be able to divert traffic from Rucker Lane over to that. Of course, Rucker Lane is a major north-south connection there between Highway 99 and 96, and with the new interchange opening up at Veterans Parkway and 840, we've seen an increase in traffic also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This time we'll hear from the environmental engineer with regards to Competitive Cable and Video Services Act, new construction and property development local notice requirement, and also consider for adoption a resolution with regards to required amount of advance notice of new construction or property developments to be given to providers of cable or video services by holders of city permits. Mr. Huddleston, I cannot wait to see how you fit in this arrangement.
Good evening, Mayor Bragg, members of the council. I'm not the cable guy, but this does involve new development, new construction, and it involves permitting and plans approval. That's how I tie in. I do have 2 items for you tonight. First, I'll offer a bit of comment on the Competitive Cable and Video Services Act as it regards local notice requirements. And then secondly, we will ask that you consider for adoption the resolution that you've referenced. In 2008, the General Assembly adopted the Competitive Cable and Video Services Act, and basically that's the act that established a state franchise for cable and video. And as a part of that act, they required that property owners and developers of new construction or property development that involves underground utilities give notice to those cable franchises. Another thing they did was require local permitting authorities, such as the City of Murfreesboro, to make this notice requirement a condition of permits that we issue for new construction and property development. And basically, the purpose of the notice requirement is to allow cable and video service providers an opportunity to install equipment in local trenches on projects while those trenches are open. So in a nutshell, the Act requires the property owner or developer notify the cable company in advance of when the trenches will be open, and then the cable companies have an opportunity to install their cable equipment while that trench is open. We did want to bring that before you tonight as information, and we also wanted to bring it before you because of the audience that the council meetings have, just to put on notice the property owners and developers as they bring projects through our process. We will be requiring that they notify the cable franchises in our community, and we have worked with Alan Bozeman on that, and he understands what the requirements are for the local providers, and then we understand what the requirements are for notification. We are also working to give an update to the Planning Commission. We propose to use a mail-out to help notify contractors, engineers, and property developers. And we are going to schedule a meeting, just an informational meeting with stakeholders, so that we can provide them information on what the city will be requiring for these notice requirements.
Mr. Young?
Mr. Huddleston, what would the situation be if a cable provider did not act in a timely manner so that the developer could close his ditches and move on with the project?
If the cable provider does not act in a timely manner,
to allow the developer to continue on with his project?
The developer can close up the trenches and continue with their project.
Who would finally determine that situation?
I'm not sure that I fully understand who
would determine what a timely manner is, and so the developer could move on with his project, not waiting for a cable provider to
fill the trench.
For the trench.
Yes.
I guess what I'm asking is, if the developer thinks he's ready to close the trench and the cable guy's not there, are we going to wait on the cable guy?
The way the law is structured, notice is, you're supposed to give notice 60 days in advance of the development and of the days that it would be open. So somebody is supposed to say it's going to be open January 2nd through 6th, and if, for example, and that it would be the burden on the provider to get it in during those days. And if it was the 7th and they showed up and the trench was closed, they would have to bear any expense of reopening. You know, you have to comply with the notice. The provision in the law also allows local governments to have a period of time that is less than 60 days if they take action. And it's because we realize that 60 days in advance when you're going to have your open trench days is a little unrealistic, it seemed. And so trying to shorten the period seemed that it would be beneficial to the development community. But even though the period of notice to the provider is, if you accept our resolution, shortened from 60 to 10 days, that would not eliminate the requirement that the actual days that the trench will be opened need to be specified in the notice that is given. So if you miss the window, then the burden, if you're the developer, you don't have to keep it open just because the cable people haven't shown up. You don't have to wait for the cable guy to come. You have to keep it open the days you said you were going to.
Well, the reason, you know why I asked this question, but is there any way we can tie this into moving of cable lines and phone lines and things like that?
Well, the concept was, you mean can we condition the...
You move ours, we'll move yours? Or?
No, we can't, because it's not a question of city projects. We're really talking about private in terms of this. No, the city will have to follow the same standard, but we can't condition it. This is to benefit them. It's not to benefit us.
But I'm not sure they have a standard.
No comment. No disagreement.
So, Ms. McGann, there's a finite number of days that the trench is to be left open.
Yeah, if you in your notice at least 10 days in advance, this trench will be open for 1 day. I believe that would meet the requirement. But if you say it's going to be open for 5 days, you can't then close it in 3 and not expect that somebody will call you on that. So it's a notice period, but they're going to have to move to get it in that period. And I should add that it's only people who are legally authorized to be there. This doesn't change the need for people to have either a franchise from the city or from the state. We have had a problem with people who haven't had either trying to put things on our right-of-way, and this doesn't change that. Just because the trench is open doesn't mean anybody can put stuff there. If you're legal authorized to be there, this gives you a window of opportunity to do it without expense to you.
And then the cable guy can be there between the hours of 8 and 12 or 1 and 5.
And you must be there to meet him at the door.
Any other questions?
Well, Councilman Young did ask what the penalty was or what the hammer was if the cable company doesn't show up, and we're not sure there is one, but there is a hammer if the developer or property owner does not notify, and they can be held responsible for the cost of new trenching if there is not proper notification. So we want to help the development community make sure the notice is proper and timely. And the Act also requires that the city make it a condition of any permit. So we'll be working with Mr. Whitaker and the Codes Department to get this language into future permits so that the notice is there. Ms. McGannon alluded to this, but the Act makes reference to a 60-day notice unless there is a shorter local notice requirement. In any case, the notice cannot be less than 10 days. The resolution that we have for you tonight would set the local notice requirement for projects in the city of Murfreesboro at 10 days. I'll be glad to answer any more questions on that report.
Any questions? You have this resolution before you.
Move for approval.
Second.
A motion and second on the resolution. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Huddleston. This time we'll consider any beer permit applications. Ms. Wright?
I have 3 tonight, Mayor. There's a lounge at 534 Southeast Broad Street that is changing ownership and has met all the requirements. There's a new convenience store at 2137 Northwest Broad Street. It has actually finished the codes inspections late this afternoon, not in time for them to be typed up and signed and copied, but I did get a call from Building and Codes that said that they had met all their requirements. And then we have one location, a restaurant at 1845 South Church Street, that they expect to get their finals before we meet again and would like permission to issue that permit once those have occurred.
Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. You have before you a revised list of the statements to be considered for payment. Are there any questions? I notice, Mr. Lyons, there's $4.4 million minimum in payments for road projects or retainage.
We've been busy.
Absolutely. Rutherford Boulevard, Middle Tennessee Boulevard, DeJarnett Lane, Rutherford Boulevard, Florence Road, Middle Tennessee Boulevard, Conference Center, and Battleground Drive extensions. Quite an extensive list. Is there a motion we pay the bills?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. This time we'll consider any other business from the council or staff to come before the council. Ms. McGannon.
Thank you, Mayor. Placed on your table tonight was a recommendation from your legal staff to authorize a settlement of a condemnation matter with Boggs Kurlander Steel, which is the owner of the Cedar Park Trailer Court, which was impacted by the relocation and extension of North Tennessee Boulevard and Northfield Boulevard. You've got a map attached to my cover letter. The proposed additional payment from the city would be $12,500.
Any questions of Ms. McGannon?
Move to be approved.
Second.
Motion and second. Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. I've placed before you commission and board suggested appointments to Land Ball Library, reappoint Shanto Serenho, and reappoint our own Mr. David Edwards.
I just want to ask a question. If there's a split vote on Mr. Edwards, can he vote for himself?
He's asked me to vote against this also.
Well, he got a book and everything now, so we're getting, put him back on the library board.
He got that book to sit on.
I would ask.
It's a booster seat.
And also to appoint a new member, and to appoint a new member of the Disciplinary Review Board, Patrick Murphy. And you have a questionnaire attached on Mr. Murphy. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to accept these either reappointments or appointments. Mr. Edwards, I'm pulling for you.
I'm going to abstain, Your Honor.
Call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bratcher.
Aye.
Mr. Edwards.
Vote.
Aye.
Mr. Gilly.
Aye.
Mr. McFarland.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young. Mayor Bragg.
Aye. I guess it was almost as unanimous as it seemed.
It was
It
almost.
was almost as unanimous. Any other business?
Mayor, just one quick mention. I think we got some preliminary word to you, and we're getting some press information out as well. You had mentioned road projects. TDOT is getting ready to rebuild the 2 bridges on Broad Street there at Main by the Dodge store. Those projects will be disruptive. They were a little late in getting word to us, but we are going to be sitting down with TDOT officials early next week to go over their plan, make sure that they are doing a good job communicating with the area businesses and getting word out to the public about what this project's going to do and potential detour routes. So it looks like construction's going to be about a 5-month process, so look for additional information from TDOT about that project.
Which bridge is that?
The 2 bridges on Broad Street. One of the bridges is actually physically in the intersection of Broad Street and Main Street. That's going to be the one that's going to be the most difficult because it's going to be hard to get some of the cross traffic.
And I assume that we'll have to keep the Parks and Rec Commission involved because that is...
It will shut part of the Greenway down.
Shut part of the Greenway down at Cannonsburg.
So we will be meeting with TDOT next week about that.
Someone coated in chicken grease.
That's what the problem is.
Well, thank you for that. And obviously, there are many road projects that are still underway in the city of Murfreesboro and the adjoining county areas, so we ask everyone to be vigilant. Anything else to come before the council? You're adjourned.